Madagascar is facing a new era of military rule after weeks of youth protests engulfed the Indian Ocean nation. The African Union has suspended Madagascar and called for the restoration of a civilian-led government. Madagascar's new ruler is Colonel Michael Randrianirina, who led soldiers from his elite unit in a mutiny against former President Ange Rojewel, joining the demonstrations, calling for him to step down and urging soldiers not to fire on the protesters. That meant the end of the line for Rojewel, who fled Madagascar on board a French military plane, saying his life was at risk. Rojewel's ouster was a key demand of the Gen Z protesters. They've been demonstrating for more than 3 weeks over lack of basics such as water and power, which brought a crackdown from the previous administration. Madagascar's new military leaders have promised elections within the next 2 years.
We had to take responsibility yesterday because there's nothing left in the country. No president in the Senate, no government. Madagascar is a dying country. We must take responsibility as citizens and patriots. According to the ruling issued by the High Constitutional Court, I'm taking the position of president. These friends of mine are with me. There must be an oath-taking.
Now, thousands of young protesters fill the streets of Antananarivo. Some welcomed the military's takeover, but others had a warning.
First of all, I'm very happy. Really very happy as a young person here, living in Madagascar. We're free now. We've won. In fact, it's really a victory. I don't know what to say anymore, but I'm happy, that's it.
I'm glad he's no longer in power. But we also have a message for the deputies and all the other corrupt authorities who still remain. You have the same mindset. And next time, it will be your turn. We won't stop here. Madagascar needs to be purified. The whole system must change.
And to gain more insight into the developments in the context of what is taking place in Madagascar, we've invited Ketakandriana Rafitoson onto the program. She's an anti-corruption and pro-democracy activist and the vice chair of Transparency International. From 2018 to 2024, she served as the executive director of Transparency International Madagascar. Welcome to DW News Africa, Ketakandriana. Young people in Madagascar took to the streets to protest water and power shortages. Socio-economic challenges in the country are seen as emblematic of corruption and bad governance. This has now culminated in the military taking over the country. What does this mean now for Madagascar and its young people?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. What's happening in Madagascar today, I would say, is both tragic and revealing. Young people initially took the streets not to topple a regime, but to demand dignity, access to water, electricity, and jobs. These are basic rights that decades of corruption, elite capture, and bad governance have denied them. So when soldiers eventually intervened, it was not to seize power at first, but to stop the bloodshed caused by weeks of repression. And that's why I think many people cheered, not out of support for a coup, but out of relief that the violence had stopped. But we must be careful here. Restoring calm must not translate into military rule. The youth's courage opened the democratic space, and it must now be protected and not confiscated. Civil society is, for instance, proposing a constitutional and civilian-led transition with a neutral prime minister and clear accountability. The next days will determine whether Madagascar steps back into the cycle of authoritarianism or forward toward genuine renewal driven by citizens. So, yeah.
You touched on it there, but when the coup leader, Colonel Michael Randrianirina, was addressing a crowd in the capital, he received cheers of approval when he asked the crowd if they were ready for a military takeover. What does that tell us about where public sentiment is in Madagascar? He had asked a direct question: are you ready for a military takeover?
Yeah. So once again, I do think that those cheers reflected at the time exhaustion and relief. So a mixture of those, and not a collective desire for military power. After 2 weeks of brutal repression since the beginning of the protests on September 25th, killings and fear were increasing in the capital city and other regions of Madagascar. So the people needed someone to stop the violence. And so when Colonel Ketakandriana asked the crowd if they wanted change, it was, I think, an emotional release, not a blank check for a junta. In truth, public sentiment today is complex in Madagascar. People trust neither the corrupt civilian elite nor the military hierarchy. What they are expressing is a deep hunger for justice, for truth and accountability. And that's why the civil society proposal matters. We're asking the army to return quickly to its constitutional role, ensuring security and not governing, and to open space for dialogue with youth and civic actors. If the army overstays, then popular sympathy will evaporate very fast.
If we can talk a moment about the President Ange Rajwell. He first came to power in 2009 in a popular uprising similar to what has happened in Madagascar in the last few weeks. Is there something different about this particular moment?
Yes, there is a difference, and the difference is fundamental because Ange Rajwell is a putschist. In 2009, the uprising that brought him to power was engineered by political elites, backed by opportunistic networks and potentially foreign interests. It was a classic power grab masked as a revolution. So the genuine intention then was really to seize power, not to bring people's grievances on the table. But today, what we're seeing is spontaneous and authentic. The movement began with young people from the Gen Z movement who had no political party, no hidden agenda, and they have repeated that multiple times. Only the will to reclaim their future. They are better informed, digitally connected, and socially conscious. What radicalized them was not ideology, but repression. Every tear gas canister, every beating from the gendarme, every lie from the presidency convinced more citizens to stand up. And this time, I think it's not about seizing power, but redefining it. Demanding more transparency, accountability, and participation, and also rebuilding a genuine social contract which has been broken by years of lies and corruption. And that's why civil society stands beside them, those young people, to help turn resistance into a constructive democratic process, and not another manipulation from the top.
Madagascar is a former French colony. To what extent is France still involved in Madagascar, and has that had any influence on political developments in the country?
Yes, France's shadow over Madagascar has never truly faded, let's be honest. Economically speaking, French companies still control many of our key sectors in energy, in banking, telecommunications, etc. And politically, the ties remain ambiguous between the two countries. President Rajwell himself holds French nationality, which by Madagascar's constitution should have barred him from office. And this is a source of huge controversy in the country itself. When our ancestors have been battling for freedom from the French people, now we had a French president. That double allegiance has always raised questions of loyalty and legitimacy. The revelation that Rajwell was allegedly exfiltrated by a French military aircraft when protests escalated shocked the public. And people wonder, was there a deal between the two presidents, especially since he later issued a presidential pardon, releasing French citizens jailed in the Apollo 21 coup plot case? France has denied interference, but perception matters. And the perception is one of asymmetry and dependence. For many Malagasy people, the fight for democracy is also a fight for genuine sovereignty and dignity. So, yeah, that's a complicated matter.
You're a pro-democracy activist. When one reads the statistics that show that 3/4 of Madagascar's population of 30 million people live in poverty, is it fair to say democracy isn't working for people? And I guess we can extend this beyond Madagascar and talk about other countries where we've seen similar popular uprisings led by young people, the most recent example perhaps being Morocco.
Yeah, so I'd say that it's not democracy that is failing here. It's those who have emptied democracy of meaning. When 3/4 of our population live in poverty, while a small elite thrives on state capture, people naturally lose faith, I would say. And in Madagascar, elections have become rituals without accountability. Institutions are weak, justice is politicized and captured, and corruption is systemic. But the young generation's uprising shows that citizens still believe in democracy when it delivers justice and not privilege, of course. And their struggle echoes those in Morocco, those we had in Nepal or Peru, for instance. It's about youth reclaiming voice in systems that excluded them. So true democracy isn't just about ballots, I would say. It's about trust, fairness, and shared prosperity. For it to work, governments must fight corruption, invest in basic services, and protect freedoms. Otherwise, people will continue to seek justice in the streets. The challenge now is to channel that energy into rebuilding institutions that finally belong to the people. So what's happening in Madagascar is a warning and a promise, and same thing in other countries. A warning that neglect, corruption, and lies can ignite a nation. A promise that even after decades of disillusion, a generation can still rise for integrity, truth, and hope. And the world should listen to them not as a footnote to crisis, but at the start of a genuine renewal of democracy.
Ketakandriana, Rafitoson, thanks very much. We appreciate your insights on DW News Africa.
Thanks for the opportunity.